Consolidation of the school district here. It's a fascinating one and one that I'm looking forward to hearing because I'm not particularly well versed in it. Certainly not as well versed as our board is here. But first I'd like to ask Lou Laporta to come up, our originator of the Henderson Historical Society, and among other things, so Lou? You can use the microphone.
Thank you, Mark. That mic working?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, as I've been acquainted to, that I'd like to say hello to every one of you. I'm Lou Laporta, and I'm part of the Henderson Historical Society. Believe me, we are delighted to have you here. I mean, there's a good portion of this meeting this evening that should be told. Henderson School District started at one time. I've had some things involved with it, but this is our lecture tonight, and I'd like to state one thing, that we have a number of lectures at this evening. You'll be hearing a tremendous amount of good things that happen with the Henderson School District and the districts that we had. I knew Argyle Gray pretty well, and he was just a great fellow. What little I know about this whole thing is that early on, I was asked if I would like to put a consolidation with Argyle Gray. Good. But at any rate, he called, and I'm just going to tell you a little story about it. He called, and he said, Lou, would you like to really help us out? And I said, what's the nature? He says, I'm trying to put this school district together. He says, I've got a big job. And of course, I said, well, yes. I had the policy here at the city of Henderson at that time. But I felt that I shouldn't be trying to take this situation by myself. And I'm telling you just this, that I did have two others that helped out. I had one, Dave Lee. He was with the St. Paul Fire and Marine. I had Bert Levitt and myself. I didn't feel like I should be doing this by myself. The Southern Nevada independent agencies, believe it or not, there were 69 policies out at that time. And we didn't know exactly what it contained. But we reduced it down to 12. And finally, years later, we dropped it down to 1. And a large company put the bid in and took it over. So it's an interesting kind of situation that you'll be hearing tonight. So let me end and say welcome again, and you'll hear a good lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Oh, that's mine. Yeah, don't worry about it. We did lose a very important member. I'm going to ask Val to come up and say a few words about Tina.
Hi, I'm Val Laporta, and I don't know how we're all going to get through this, I tell you. But we lost the biggest heart of the community, which was Tina Smith. And, excuse me. But the biggest, funnest thing we're going to do is have a social ice cream. Her mother started it in, I think it was the late or early 40s, her mother Ruth. And so we are going to honor Tina, and we will be doing the ice cream social. And we've always wanted to do it, and we thought it'd be very appropriate to do Pioneer Day, which is in April. And Mark's going to let you know the event dates and that. But I have to say this too real quickly here, that if the directors, the original directors are here, before bylaws, I need to say that, You were handpicked by Tina Smith. I don't think they knew it. And I have a big mouth. And I know she'd like me to share that. But Tina was such a beautiful heart person. I tell you, we're going to miss her. Thank you.
Tonight's subject is, as you have heard, the school consolidation. When you look at education in our valley, schools go back to 1856, when there was a school opened at the Mormon fort. This was an important part. But schools did not always encompass the entire county. Certainly in 1856, there was no county. We didn't have to worry about that, but we are one of 3 states in the Union that have county-wide school districts, county-wide combined school districts, grammar school, junior high, high school. The other 2 are Florida and West Virginia. Other states, Hawaii is 1 school district, Puerto Rico is 1 school district. But we had an interesting time because we had to take 17 different school districts and go plop. I think it took a little bit more than that, maybe. Oh, okay, that was about it, just plop, everybody went together, no problem. In Clark County. I think you may get a few more details than that tonight. So I'm looking forward to this as well. I was not here at that time, so I did not get a chance to see it. But we are going to be hearing about the history. Just to give you a little background, before consolidation, school districts were based on who had the population in an area. A good example was Railroad Pass. Railroad Pass had a school district in the 1930s. In 1941, a new community was laid out called Basic Town Site. It was named for the Basic Magnesium Plant, which was named for Basic Refractory Brick Plant in Ohio. But there was no school district here. So how do you get a school district for a new community? Wasn't as it is today. At that point, they took the boundaries of Railroad Pass School District and expanded them. And just said, okay, Railroad Pass School District now covers this new community of Basic Town Site. And in 44, that became Henderson, and we had a school district here. That's how it was done at that point in time. That all changed in the 50s. That's what we're going to be hearing about tonight. I'm going to ask Rick Watson, who is one of the historians of the school districts here in the schools, to come up and introduce our panel. Normally I do that, but Rick is much more intimately aware and knowledgeable on our panel, much more so than I am. So Rick, if you'll come up and introduce the panel.
Thank you, Mark. You know, in addition to being one of the directors on the Henderson Historical Society, I'm also a member of a group called the Clark County School District Archive Committee. Kay Carl and Dennis Ortwine and I and a whole bunch of other retired school district folks are working on archiving old photos and memorabilia, documents. Lou was talking about insurance, how the difficulty that insurance and school insurance caused when it came time to consolidate. And, you know, we have a copy of all of the old school board minutes going all the way back. Kay, how far back do they go? The early 1900s. The school district put those, copied them onto CDs for us. So we've been poking around and trying to find good stories in those old board minutes. And I found the minutes that talk about the story that Lou was telling. So I copied about half of them. You just made paper copies, and I'll finish that up. And then, you know, one of my jobs with the Historical Society is to do the newsletter, and I post stories and pictures up on Facebook. So we'll we'll get some pictures of some of those old timers that were in the insurance business, and including Lou, and we'll put them up on Facebook, and we'll write about them in the newsletter. You know, why are we doing all of this? We're all retired and old and, you know, failing health, and but it's important. The school district, as wonderful as it is, has an institutional memory. Some people, was it John Kenneth Galbraith, he believed that in government it was about 30 years. And when you have the benefit of old timers who live longer than that institutional memory, I think it's important that the community take advantage of that experience. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing it. And every other month, the Historical Society puts on a panel discussion, and those are the kinds of things that our organizations could do. I think we're really important to education, to teachers. You know, teachers can teach out of a history book, but how much nicer is it to be able to teach out of newspapers and oral histories and the kind of videos that we're going to make of tonight's program. Enrique VR in the back is from Radioactive Productions, and he's recording this program. It'll be like an oral history. We'll, when he's finished editing it, we'll put the link up on Facebook, and you'll be able to watch the whole thing all over again, or maybe just pieces of it. The Henderson libraries have a display out in the foyer, and on your way out, you ought to stop and talk to the two library representatives, and they're going to put on a scan day over at the Paseo Verde Library. So if you have old pictures that you would like to digitize, and they'll put these on a thumb drive and give them to you free. And of course, the only bargain in the deal is that they get to keep copies of the pictures too. So you wouldn't want to give them any copies of things that, you know, are personal and that sort. But this is a nice way to expand our ability to tell history. Pete LaChapelle has some of his students here tonight, his history class from here at Nevada State College. And we're, you know, I'm going to volunteer our time, as much of it as we can scrape together, to help students, elementary school students and high school students and college students too. So without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Gary Gray, at the very end of the table, is a gifted teacher and education technology innovator who influenced the way the CCSD builds and equips schools. His work at model programs at the CCSD Education Foundation and at the Alexander Dawson School kept him informed with all of the education issues that are important today. Gary is also a native Nevadan and a witness to 68 years of Nevada education history. Growing up in the family of Las Vegas Superintendent Argyle Gray, during the consolidation, he enjoyed a special learning experience that he will share with us tonight. Mr. Dennis Ortwine, Dr. Dennis Ortwine, I should say, is the school namesake. He came to Clark County, the school district, as a teacher in 1956. The first year the schools of Southern Nevada became the Clark County School District. He attended, the very first meeting that he attended, I believe, was the big orientation that the school districts in those days used to have. They could get all the teachers in one room. The Henderson teachers all met at the gym of the basic or the town site school. But Dennis attended that first meeting, and that was the first time all of the teachers who resided in Clark County met as teachers of the Clark County School District. He served 30 years as a teacher and administrator, and after retirement, he continues to serve as a volunteer for worthy causes that promote teaching and learning. During his career, he has served as an education ambassador to the government of Nigeria in the area of teacher training. He's been a civil rights advocate in the Clark County School District's integration efforts and a federal and special programs coordinator. Dr. Ortwine retired in 1986 but continued to serve education causes In 1987, he was interim superintendent of the Esmeralda County School District. Today, he is a member of the CCSD Archive Committee, helping to preserve the history of the CCSD and to interpret that history, as he tonight is going to do by serving on this panel. Dr. Kay Carl came to Southern Nevada from Ohio in the 1970s. Her early experiences included teaching high school civics and history. While teaching in Ohio, she earned a certificate in guidance and counseling and capitalized on that training in her early work in Clark County. Dr. Carl's been principal at Sunset High School, an evening hour school for working students and mothers who could not attend during the day. I have to say, I think I knew that, but I read up on Kay here, and I thought about that. What a what a wonderful assignment that must have been. Wonderful for her to do it, and wonderful for kids who were really having a hard time getting to school in the regular program. You have to think that that experience as a young principal helped guide her for all the good things she did in her future. Her administrative experiences include her service at two Clark County elementary schools. One was at Kit Carson, one of the old schools on the west side of our school district, or our community. The west side was the place where most of our black families lived for a good period of time. Kit Carson was a sixth grade center, and it was really one of the key places for the development and the implementation of our integration program. Good school, another good training place for Kay, who was destined for more responsibility in our district. She went on to be the Associate Superintendent of Education under Brian Cram. She had responsibility for all the elementary schools in Clark County. So she came out to Henderson and met with Mo Flores. Colleen McGinty, I think, was Mo's secretary. Colleen's usually at our programs. I was hoping she'd be here tonight so she could see Kay. In retirement, she continues to serve the community as an education advocate, where she provided leadership at the Nevada State Education Foundation and for the school district's archive committee, charged with organizing volunteers who are collecting and archiving the history of education efforts in Southern Nevada. Ralph Cadwallader came to the Clark County School District in 1965 and began his career as an English teacher at Garside Junior High School. He later served as dean at Garside and assistant principal at Western and at basic high schools. He said he had fond memories of the teachers at basic high school. He pointed out Marlon Walker, who he really admired. Somehow or another, we've got to get Marlon Walker to be on one of our panels in the future. There's still a number of teachers who taught in the Henderson School District before and during that consolidation period who are still alive, and it would really be fun to capture their comments on video. In the late 1970s, Ralph was assigned a position of Associate Superintendent, where he supervised all CCSD middle schools and high schools. In the 1990s, Mr. Cadwallader's career took him to the Tempe Union High School District in Arizona, where he served as an Associate Superintendent. After his retirement in Tempe, he returned to Las Vegas and became Executive Director of the Nevada Association of School Administrators. Ralph Cadwallader's career experiences have made him a keen observer of education trends and policies. The Historical Society welcomes his insight as the community seeks to understand the organization and challenges presented by Assembly Bill 649 to deconsolidate and decentralize the Clark County School District. So here we are talking about the reorganization that happened in the 1950s, and now the opposite kind of reorganization that's going to take place and is taking place right now. So without further ado, maybe we'll start with Gary Gray. Gary,
just a moment. Just so that everybody understands, we will be taking questions after everybody speaks. So please hold your questions until the end, if you would. And once everybody's had a chance to speak, then we'll take questions from the audience.
Sure, and then maybe Gary, then pass the mic to whoever should be next in the order, the speaking order. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you how the Clark County School District got its start, and it's how we're in this, the 5th largest school district in the United States, which is absolutely amazing. I want to talk to you about Raymond Guile Gray, went by Argyle Gray, and the story, his love of Nevada, is how I'm going to start this, and I'm going to go way back. He grew up in Reno. His dad was a house builder, didn't have contractors in those days. You just hired somebody to build your house. So Dad was really good at that, building houses. And went to Reno High. And upon graduation, he needed money to go to college. So he got a job with the General Land Office and surveying the land in Nevada, mostly northern Nevada. Did that for 2 years. And he knew every nook and cranny, every mountain, valley, and he used to tell stories about they would try to find a town to come in to take a bath because they did most of their camping on what they called a fly camp. They just had to set up tents. And he talked about these towns. One of them was Fairview, little ghost town today. And another one was Copperreed. They went into Copperreed. They thought they could get a bath and get some food, and they walked into the town. Everybody was gone. They went into the post office. Some mail was still there. The stamp that cancels the letters, stamps were still there. The schoolhouse, the lessons were still on the wall. There's books, school books on the desks. Anyway, so that was his experience of these little towns, most of them gone, of course. And then after he graduated from college, I'm going to digress a little bit because there's a famous Henderson fella named Kirby Stoddard that was a good friend of my dad's in college. And Dad wanted to go into engineering, and Kirby was going into engineering, became a chemical engineer. And the reason I mention him, during the 1950s, he was head of what we call the Titanium Metals Corporation here, out on, we call that basic management. Is that what you, anyway. So Dad says, I can't get a job in that, so he went into education. After graduating in 1936, the only job he could get was teaching Spanish. Remember, he graduated from University of Nevada, Reno, UNR, and teaching Spanish at Las Vegas High School, 1936. And that's where he became friends with Harold Brindley. You've heard that name. He was head of personnel for the school district. George E. Harris, who was kind of facilities, buildings, and building new schools. And then there was Harvey Dondero, who was an administrative assistant. And he, at that time, in 1936 through 1938, he made friends with those folks. And he also worked for Maud Fraser. You've heard of Maud Fraser. She was the superintendent of schools in the 30s and I think into the 40s for the Las Vegas City Schools, and later became in the legislature, and I think she was the first female lieutenant governor of the state of Nevada for a period of time. Anyway, so after 2 years, a teaching position opened up at Reno High, and he taught at Reno High, and then he got a job working for the State Department of Education, and his job was traveling to all of the rural schools, mostly in the northern part of the state, but he did do some things in Lincoln County. His job was to go into these one-room schoolhouses and see what was going on and supervising those people. Then a job opened up, World War II, he was a second lieutenant in the Navy, and then after the war, he got a job as superintendent of schools of Yerington, which is in Lyon County, and that was just the Yerington School District at the time. And he was there, I think, for, it wasn't too long. I was very young, but I know Dad was amazing because there was no place to live, so he built a house in 6 weeks. It wasn't much of a house, but he did it. And then he got the job as principal of Reno High. And he was at the old Reno High, and then when they built the new building, he went there. And then I've got to tell this story because this is what Dad was like. The superintendent of the schools at the time was a man named Charlie Wooster. And I think Dad at a board meeting got up and spoke at the board meeting for the Reno City Schools. And the next morning he got a call from the superintendent saying, "Are you after my job?" And Dad says, no, I'm just trying. And so anyway, Dad quit just like that. Not a lot of people would do something like that, but he had no job. He came home. I remember him coming home and says, "Well, Mom, guess what? You know, I quit." And then, so he went to California and got a job with the Contra Costa County Schools. And while he was there, he decided, I'm going to get a doctorate in education at Stanford. So he applied, and so while he was working, and by the way, he was adding onto the house because he was supposed to buy a 2-bedroom house, and a 3-bedroom house, and my mom was really upset, and it was only 2 bedrooms, so he had to put another bedroom on. Anyway, so while at Stanford, he became 2 of his professors, Bill Odell and Bill McConnell, William Odell and William McConnell, were professors in the doctorate program. And so they also had a consulting job on the side where these McConnell and Odell would consult school districts, and they happened to be consulting with the Las Vegas City Schools because of growth. Even in the 50s, there was tremendous growth. So anyway, he got his doctorate degree, and as his dissertation that he wrote, it was the consolidation of all of these little school districts. Kay, how many school districts?
Well, in 1950, the state had 173 elementary districts, 35 high school districts, and within our county, there were 14.
Anyway, so he knew that if, it wouldn't fly if it was in his name. So McConnell and Odell, a professor from Stanford, approached the state, and that's how we ended up with these 17 counties. And I left out one thing. I'm sorry I left it out. After 9 months in California, he was hired as superintendent of schools of the Las Vegas City School District. I left that out. So anyway, and then he became the superintendent, the first superintendent of the Clark County School District. And Lou Laporte here mentioned Dad's job was really hard because you had Lyle Burkholder out here who was superintendent in Henderson, and you had, I can't remember, who was in Boulder City at that time? Eldred Edwards, that's right. I used to go deer hunting with Eldred Edwards. Oops. So, anyway, and then we had Mesquite, Moapa, Overton, all that area. Seymour Fish, that's right. So anyway, he had to put all that together, and it was a hard job. And like Lou Laporta said, Dad would call, he knew key people in each one of these communities to try to, drum up support for this. So that's how we got into this. Now, Dad's love of Nevada, you can see the background, but he also, something that is really, really important that he believed in, and I want to mention this because when we talk about consolidation, we need to be fiscally responsible, and that's what Dad was all about. He was intellectually honest. He was fiscal responsibility was number one with him. When he came as superintendent of Las Vegas City Schools, the administrative office was on the corner of Lewis and 9th Street. And they needed a bigger administrative office when they consolidated. So rather than to build a new building, which would cost a lot more money, they took the old Las Vegas Grammar School and converted it into an administrative office, which was a lot cheaper. And so that, you know, Dad really was a bean counter in that. He didn't, you know, that's what he believed in. So I want to digress about something else because I think it's important to know the man. He was in the legislature in the 60s, and he worked at that time after he left the school district, and then Leland B. Newcomer followed him. He was in the legislature, and there was a savings and loan that he worked for, and there was a bill that the savings and loans in the state needed to make their lives, you know, make more money and whatnot. And Dad, you know, was a vice president, and so he decided that this bill was bad for the state of Nevada. So he killed the bill, and of course he was fired right away. And that's just the kind of person he was. He just was straight arrow. And I'm just gonna let it go with that and pass the mic on.
I'm going to share a little bit about leading up to the consolidation, and we're going to skip to the 50s now. As I mentioned a little bit ago, there were 173 elementary districts, 35 high school districts in the state as we began in the 1950s. Clark County, of course, had 14 districts within the county at the start of the 50s. And it was really easy to start a district. All you needed were 5 school-age children, 1 qualified teacher, an agreement that you'd go to school 6 months, and you had to have at least an average attendance of 3 days a week. That would qualify you to get state funds. And that's how we started in the 1950s. Consequently, every mining camp would establish a school, and the big ranches would have a school. And so when you look at the map prior to the 1950s, it's just dotted with these little schools all over the state. Gary referred to how his father found one in that little community that was abandoned, with the school books left in it. It was a period of growth, but the money did not grow with the student population. Does that sound familiar? Part of the problem with that began in the 1930s when they had a constitutional amendment that prohibited estate and inheritance taxes. And there was also then a limit of property tax to 5 cents on the dollar of assessed property valuation. So there were very few ways to get money for education. And consequently, over time, buildings disintegrated, double sessions were common, fewer teachers were hired, class sizes went up, and textbooks were in short supply. In January of 1951, parents in Reno were so concerned about their schools that they began to form a public committee. And that was the beginning of 6 years of effort to get funding for education in Nevada. In 1952, the school administrators proposed a 2-cent sales tax to fund schools. That was dead on arrival at the legislature. But other parents in other communities began to follow Reno's example and form citizen committees. And people finally began to realize that there was a need for new taxes and to understand that the present tax structure was too narrow. And so consequently, the governor, after being pushed by these parents and teacher groups, formed his own committee called the School Survey Committee, and they then began to figure out how they could solve the problem. Argyle Gray, Gary's father, wrote a letter to Governor Russell and said, here's what's happening to our schools, and underneath that was a little hint that maybe the state better get on the horse and do something, or there might be some ballot initiatives that would come as a result of underfunding our schools. So Russell was pushed to find some solutions. So he called a special session of the legislature in '64 and asked for $25,000 for a professional survey to be directed by his committee. The survey then hired George Peabody College, Teachers College, to do the survey. And they spent almost 6 months in Nevada surveying all of the different school districts and finally made a recommendation that we consolidate to 17 school districts, and rather than the hundreds that we had prior to this time. So the revolution began, and that was traumatic. I mean, each of the 14 districts within Clark County had their own little bureaucratic group who did not want to be displaced, and also the school boards that went with each of those districts within Clark County didn't want to lose their power either. So when the revolution came and we consolidated, Argyle Gray really did have the burden of trying to put it all together. Now, Denny's going to comment for a minute because he was here during the months that that was happening. Denny, you want to tell about your experience?
Well, I'm really old. So well, so here it is, 1956. I came down to Las Vegas to seek my fortune, and about 99,000 people were here. It was totally racially segregated. The schools, the restaurants, the hotels were all racially segregated. And so I went to work in the school, which was all white teachers and all white faculty, students. Then I went to another school, a junior high school, which was all white faculty, all white student body. Then I became principal of a school where I was, for 4 years, all white faculty, all white student body. I took a leave of absence and came back to Clark County after 2 years in Nigeria. It was now 1968. And I returned to Clark County as principal of Joe Mackey School, which was one of the 7 West Side schools. But guess what? 100% student body was black and 50-50 faculty. So at that time, the exploration was on to desegregate the school district. And at Joe Mackey, I had 2 ladies there who had programs working on the desegregation program. One was called the West Side Council, headed by Mabel Hogard. Have you ever heard of Mabel Hogard? And Volunteers for Education, Edith Katz. And Edith brought volunteers from all the greater community into the 7 West Side schools. So we worked on a program there. We collaborated with Henry Bozarth, one of the assistant superintendents, and we established a program called POSE. So this was the first sort of desegregation program. POSE means Program of Social Enrichment. And we established cross-busing for the 6th grade students in the 7 West Side schools to a sister school out in the major community, and they did that on a monthly basis, and that was the first busing program.
Denny was telling me on another occasion about the fact that he did attend the first meeting that Argyle Gray had in Clark County after his election as superintendent, and they got all the teachers together right into...
All of the teachers and administrators could fit into the old Las Vegas high school auditorium, and now that's the academy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Academy for the Performing Arts, whatever.
Did you want to add to that, Gary?
There we go. Dennis was talking about the integration, and I think it's good to say that in Las Vegas, there was Las Vegas High up until 1956, and they opened Rancho. Now, the students that were black living in what we call the West Side all went to Vegas High. And so when Rancho was built, that was the zone. The West Side kids would go to Rancho. But my father decided he'd just split the West Side down in half because he knew that there'd be a lot of people that wouldn't want their children to go to Rancho, so he divided it down. He did the same thing in 1959 when they opened up 4 junior highs. They went from K-8 to junior high in 1959. So we had J.D. Smith, John C. Fremont, Hyde Park, and I think Roy Martin was, and so he again divided the West Side so that a certain number of black students would go to all four junior highs.
Back to the revolution that came with the George Peabody Teachers College, indicating to our legislature that they needed to create the 17 school districts in Nevada. At that time, when Argyle Gray became superintendent, there were 24,240 students in Clark County and 1,300 employees. That's why they could all fit into the high school auditorium at that time. The change also led in the 1957 time period to force some changes in the equalization of property taxes statewide, which helped the resources to go to the schools that they needed. At the same time all this was going on was huge growth in Nevada, and we have been growing obviously ever since. There have been periods when there's been a little bit down, but by and large, we are always somehow in a growth cycle. And after the beginning of the Clark County School District, there obviously was a need to address the shortage of schools. And so bond issues were proposed by the county. 1 passed and 2 failed. The one that passed was in 1963. And from then on, you can see we have one of our booklets from the Clark County Archive Committee is out on the table. It goes through how you set up a school bond, and it tracks all the school bonds that we have had since the merger in 1956. Moving on to the 1960s, just briefly, and then Ralph's going to talk about the future of the district and other aspects of the district. But Denny referred to the integration issue. The elementary schools were not integrated. They were segregated, and the high schools and the junior highs were okay, but the elementary schools were not. And Denny was part of the group that tried to do some voluntary integration. They tried prestige schools. That didn't work. Voluntary integration didn't work. POS didn't work. And Newcomer, who was superintendent at the time, resigned and turned over that whole problem to Kenny Gwynn. And so Kenny Gwynn and Edna Hindman were responsible for putting together what was known as the 6th grade center plan. And the West Side schools then became 6th grade centers. The kids who lived on the West Side as kindergarten students stayed in that home school, and the 6th graders stayed in that home school. But the 1 through 5th graders were bused out of the West Side to other schools in the main valley. Henderson was not involved in that, and so there did not experience some of the agitation that went with busing those students out of their homes in the west side into the valley. Finally, the problem came to a head in 1968 when a group filed a lawsuit against the district, Kelly versus Clark County School District. And that lawsuit went on clear up into the late 1990s before we were settled with the courts. And the whole plan went through some changes, which I happened to end up supervising. But it went from 6th grade centers to prime 6, and many of those schools also became magnet schools. Hogarth just celebrated 2 weeks ago the 25th anniversary of when it was named as the first magnet school in Clark County. So the theme here that I was trying to say to you, it's been money and growth for a long time, and that has not ended and will continue. Right, Ralph?
Well, we've talked about consolidation, integration, massive growth, and now I get to talk about, should we talk about deconsolidation? I can speak from my professional experience in Clark County, which was just an extraordinary 28 years. As Rick mentioned, I started out in town working at Garside Junior High and Western High School, and then I had the unique opportunity of being asked to be an assistant principal at Basic High School for 1 year. So I went from Western, where I was an assistant for several years, to Basic. Western had 2,500 students, Basic had 1,300 students. I loved that year at Basic High School for a whole number of reasons. One was the quality of the staff. I still remember great teachers, counselors, Don Taylor, the assistant principal who worked with me. It was a great experience. But the size of the school was half the size of Western High School. And what I finally determined was what made it so great was the sense of community that Basic High School and Henderson had that I didn't experience in the first 9 years of my career. Later, I get reassigned back to town, and I become principal of Western and then associate superintendent for secondary education, supervising every high school and junior high school in the district. Great job, extraordinary job, but I wouldn't give it up for anything. When I retired, I got a job in Tempe, Arizona. Now, here's the similarity between Tempe, Arizona, my experience there, and my experience at Basic High School. Tempe, Arizona school district I worked in was the Tempe Union High School District. I supervised 6 schools, 6 high schools, 12,000 students. Went to a different school cafeteria every day to eat with kids and eat with teachers. After 2 years there, I knew every teacher by name, and I knew many, many of the parents and community leaders. Great sense of community at Tempe. So, if you were to ask this man, who's been in education for 50 years, should Clark County School District be deconsolidated? My answer is very much yes, it should be deconsolidated. But here's the kicker. How many school districts do we create when we deconsolidate the Clark County School District? I don't have an answer to that question. I don't think anybody can give a profound, thoughtful answer to that question that will satisfy everybody concerned. But let's talk about numbers. There are over 30,000 students in the Clark County School District. For purposes of discussion, let's say we divide it into 10 equal school districts. They would each be 32,000 students. They would still be among the largest school districts in the United States. Right? However, they won't be the largest school districts in Nevada anymore. Reno, where your dad started, Washoe County School District, has 67,000 students right now. So if we're going to divide the Clark County School District, will the Nevada legislature say, maybe Reno needs to be divided too? Interesting question to ponder. The big elephants in the room really are demographic changes in our community. When I say our community, Clark County community. Charter schools, and I'll get back to that in a minute, and then funding equity. The demographics in the Clark County School District from 1972, now remember I came to basic high school in 1974, were this. This was the Clark County demographics. 82.9% white, 12.4% African American, 3.2% Latino, and 0.5% Asian. That's 1972, all right? Last year, 2017, the demographics were 46.3% Latino, 25.2% white, 13.8% African American, 6.4% Asian. And when you add to that the fact that 63% of the boys and girls in the Clark County School District are receiving free and reduced lunches. In other words, there's significant poverty in our community, not to mention demographic changes. So the basic high school that I worked in and really enjoyed in 1974 is not the basic high school right now. It is not the Clark County of then, rather. It's changed significantly, and we need to take that into consideration. So demographics. I said there were three big elephants. Charter schools. I like charter schools. I think they serve an excellent purpose to provide mom and dad with an option for their child. I always think options are great, all right? But here's a statistic. I was shocked when I heard this the other day. There are 35,000 students in charter schools in Clark County. Remember I divided the school district into 10 equal districts? We really would have 11 then. We'd have the 10 Clark County School districts and the charter school district. Right? That's taking an enormous amount of funding away from Clark County, but I look upon that as not a problem, but rather a solution. Right? And the issue is funding equity. 45 states in the United States have had lawsuits brought to their legislature about funding inequity for public education. Right? Most of those lawsuits have been victorious. Right? Nevada is one of 6 states, and I know this doesn't add to 50, but nevertheless I just read this, that has not filed such a suit. But I believe it's in the making. There are some private organizations now that are putting their minds together to file an equity lawsuit to the Nevada Supreme Court to get funding equity. Will it win? Past practices in other states are that it will win. And then a short story, because this just occurred in the last week or two. Kansas just filed such a lawsuit. And they won the lawsuit in the Kansas Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, Governor, legislature, fund our schools more. So the governor proposed $600 million to fund the Kansas schools more. And the conservative legislature in Kansas said, nah, we don't think it should be $600 million. What we'll do is this. We'll hire an independent study, and the independent study will come back, and we'll fund it according to the independent study. They thought they were being really smart. The independent study was done by, I believe it was Texas A&M or Texas Tech University, not in Kansas, an independent group. And they came back and said, you are right, 600 million isn't the right number. It should be 1.8 billion. That just happened this week. Yeah. So my point is, long has public education been underfunded throughout this country. And we as citizens are responsible for voting people to the Nevada legislature, and we need to make sure that our legacy as older people helps those young people I see in the back of the room get better quality education. And we can talk about funding and whether or not it's good money after bad and stuff like that. But I just want to tell you just a few factual things and give you just my opinion. We need to divide this thing up, but I'm not sure how we can do it.
This morning I attended Pat Skurkowski's last big meeting on the state of the school district because he will retire in June and the process is already underway for a new superintendent. But I just want to make a couple of comments. There's another elephant in the room that Ralph did not mention, and that elephant is the bonding issue. If you think about how many Henderson schools are new within the last 20 years, there's money tied up in that because of the bonds that the county entered into for the whole building program that we've had in the Clark County School District. So how do you divide up the debt of that bonding issue? I don't know. Math was not one of my great strengths. So I can't help there, but it is an elephant in the room. I'd like to also comment about the reorganization that's going on now as a result of the action that was taken in 2015, 2017 in our legislature, because they did indeed create a situation where financially money is to go to the schools. 85% of the money in the school district is to go to the schools. 15% is to stay with central services. And most of you have probably read or heard about school organizational teams, that the teams at each individual school are to make the decisions about what happens in that school. Who's hired, who's fired, what's the curriculum, what textbooks do you get, how do you push technology, do you have a theme? All of that is going to be on the shoulders of the school principals. Janet, you ready to go back? And it's a major change in philosophy, that the principals will not only be instructional leaders, but they will be business managers at the same time. And that's what's happening now, and there are still unanswered questions about the reorganization plan that's going on now that still have to be solved. Some of it involves money, some of it involves who has the power. And so it'll be interesting to watch, but what I think Ralph is talking about is deconsolidation in a different form than we are into it now, with the decisions made in the 15 and 17 legislature. And who knows what will happen in the legislative session of 2019 with a new superintendent going up to Carson City.
Do you have another comment?
Something else that some of you are thinking about with this breaking up this district would be my father, who's looking down from above, would say, what are you going to do about busing? Are you going to each district have its own buses? Each district going to have their own purchasing? Each district going to have their own school plans when they build a new school? I mean, it just, we got to think about this really carefully when this is done. That's just my comment.
Gary, I need to add to what you just said, because I talked about my experience in Tempe, Arizona. It was a high school district. Two separate elementary school districts fed our high school district. Tempe Elementary District and Kyrene Elementary District fed our high school district. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock on Guadalupe Road, which is an east-west road that divides Tempe in half, you will see 3 buses. One that says Kyrene School District on the bus, one that says Tempe Elementary School District on the bus, and the other says Tempe High School District on the bus. A gross duplication of services. That's the downside of deconsolidation.
All righty then. And having a brother who was in charge of bus transportation for San Juan Unified School District in Orange County, which got rid of their buses, but ended up taking over the next school district over, their bus system. Don't ask me, I don't understand it. He's retired now. But I think we've had a lot to think about here, a lot of information. I'd like to open it up to any questions anyone might have for our speakers. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the demographics that, I forgot your name, that you were speaking about. Those don't necessarily match the demographics of Clark County as a whole, specifically the white population in the school district. Is that because they're mostly going to the charter schools and the private schools that are in the county rather than the public school system?
Is the question, was those demographics for the public school system?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you said there's like 23% white students in Clark County. I'm curious as to whether or not most of the, not most, but a lot of the white students are in charter schools, or in other
Well, the charter
options?
schools are part of the school district. They're not separate from the school district at this point.
Okay.
So the real question is, what's the background on those stats? He's questioning
Yeah,
the.
these statistics were printed in the Las Vegas Review-Journal December 10th of last year, 3 months ago.
Okay.
And it reflects Clark County School District enrollment. It doesn't reflect all of the charter private parochial school enrollment. And I think you bring up a point, and there is some white flight that results in a disproportionate database than what you see in the regular public schools. And that's just a reality of that structure. Technically, charter schools are not allowed to deny anybody to enroll in their schools, regardless of race, color, creed, or disability. But sometimes they do.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, I went to one of the magnet schools, which was at the time Hall-Patton, but now Southeast Career Technical Academy. And since then, there have been they've taken a blueprint of that school and made similar schools like ECTA, West Tech, and other schools of the like. And I've noticed that they place those schools on the edges of the Las Vegas Valley. Now, with transportation being cut off for students that would get accepted into those schools, do you think it's an issue? A personal story that I have is that I lived close. I lived on Martin Luther King and Lake Creek, and so SECTA was all the way in Henderson. So I would go to the bus stop 6 o'clock in the morning every single day to take the bus. Now, when I graduated, it was my brother's turn, and he lived in the same area and got accepted into West Tech. And at the time, transportation was cut off. So we had to figure out a way whether we should have him get onto the public bus for 2 hours to get to school in the morning, or who needed to sacrifice their time and gas or like if I needed to sacrifice one of my classes or an hour from work to take my brother to school.
So if I understand your question, you're asking whether how will the transportation issue be dealt with? Yes, okay. For the West Tech and Southeast Tech, those where they're magnet schools, where you're accepted to the magnet schools, obviously another question that would have to be dealt with is how do you get the kids to the schools? My daughter was in a magnet school, and we often had to get up early and drive her there on the way to work, and that's also obviously an issue.
Yes, it is an issue. When the magnet school programs were started, there was busing to whatever magnet school you happened to get through the lottery and were able to attend. And recently they've had to divide up the district into areas, and if you live within a certain area, then you can choose a magnet school within that area, and you'll get transportation, but you won't get it from another area. And it is a problem. The Archive Committee just finished a history of transportation in the Clark County School District, and we learned that 7% of our budget goes right now to transportation in the school district, and that's a lot of money. We don't have an answer for you at this point, and I don't know that deconsolidation would solve the problem that you're mentioning.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. With the unfortunate recent shootings in high schools across the nation, has there been any discussion regarding allocating funds towards school safety within Clark County School District?
I don't know that anybody up here can answer that. That's an internal district issue. We're dealing with the history of the district at this point. So you'd have to probably talk to the school board itself. Obviously, my hope is that there's some discussion going on how to deal with school safety issues that are here. but I don't think anybody here is privy to the internal workings of the Clark County School Board. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure even the school board is privy to the internal workings at all times. But
There were two committees or two meetings held this week. I think Monday and Wednesday, Governor Sandoval conducted a meeting with just the 17 superintendents of schools to discuss school safety. And then Wednesday, Attorney General Laxalt conducted a meeting with a variety of folks representing schools in various capacities, whatever. I do not know what the outcomes of either of those were, but at least those are two politicians who took a step in the direction. But you've just brought up an incredibly complex question, and the answers are very hard to come by.
yes, ma'am.
On that, when in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, per capita, how many counselors did you have K-12 for helping the students who needed assistance versus what we have now?
I wish Nadine Nielsen were here. She could answer that question right away. I know that when I became associate superintendent for the elementary schools, we did not have a counselor in every school, and one of my goals was to get a counselor in every school, which I think I succeeded in doing by the time I retired. And since then, growth and money caused the same problem, and at one point there was a reduction in force for counselors. Schools had to share a counselor, and then they got back to full counselors in all the schools, and then again it went backwards again. So it's just up and down depending on the money and the growth. But I can't tell you how many. I don't know that.
Yes, sir. Oh, okay, and then I'll get up here. Yes, sir, here in the back.
I have a question for you about, you mentioned the charter schools. It's my understanding that the charter schools, they get paid by the state, correct, or the school district, so essentially our tax dollars. And majority of those charter schools come from out of state, correct? They're privately owned businesses?
Yes, they are profit-making businesses that run the schools, build them and run them.
Okay. I guess my opinion, what your guys' opinion is on that, seeing our tax dollars going out of state to other companies and going to other states versus stay here, and just to see what your opinion is on that.
I'll let Ralph answer that one.
Well, I have to disclose, I was the chairman of a school board of a charter school. So I got a little bit of familiarity with it. It was Odyssey Charter School in Las Vegas here. Yes, the money comes from the state at the same allocation per pupil as the county in which the charter school resides. In other words, charter schools here get the same amount per pupil that Clark County School District gets per pupil. Whereas if it was in another county, because most of the other counties get more money per pupil than we get here, those charter schools get more money per pupil. So how does a private company make money? They make money by increasing the pupil-teacher ratio to god-awful proportions, and by hiring first-year teachers and second-year teachers and not having experienced teachers at the top of the salary schedule. It's a simple thing of mathematics, and that's how it works. And in some places it works well, some places it does not. There's one charter school that's in trouble right now because all of the students, let me reverse this, none of the students see a teacher every day. They work online. And yeah, so you've got 200 or 300 students without a teacher. You have a computer program they're working with. And that I have a lot of concerns about that. Odyssey Charter School, where I worked as a school board member, was a hybrid. Teachers spent some time teaching students, and then students spent some time working online. That works pretty well.
Yeah, but, I mean, essentially, still our tax dollars are leaving the state is bad, and that's, you know, and I was actually happy to hear you said that you're for busing up the school district, because I am, you know, also in favor of that. I have 2 young children that, unfortunately, I have to send them to private school because the schools that are that are close to my house are very overcrowded, underfunded, you know, just like the rest of all it is an option in the charter school, but once again, it's as a, you know, a taxpayer, it's unfortunate to see our money going and leaving the state of Nevada for the charter schools.
Okay, got a question up here?
I do. I must be recalling this incorrectly because I thought Governor Sandoval in his first term passed the biggest tax ever. Everybody was mad at us for passing this big tax that was going to go to education. And then 2 years later, we have no money for our schools. What did I not hear?
Okay, you heard everything correctly, but there's some selective neglect in the thinking. Governor Sandoval and the legislature did pass a very large increase in the total amount of dollars that was spent in public education. However, it was categorically assigned to special projects. It could not pay for the buses, could not pay for the electricity, could not pay for teacher salaries. It would only go for special projects that were defined by the legislature and the governor and the State Department of Education and imposed top-down on school districts. So if you went through that, there was a 3 or 4 page document in his proposal that we're going to have this program, this program, and this program, and I need X million of dollars to do it, and schools could not use it for any other purpose than those programs. Categorical funding.
Just one additional comment. You all might have voted, you remember, for the marijuana tax? It was supposed to go to schools? Ha.
Seems to be some issues with where the money goes. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm fairly new to Nevada. I've only lived here about 1.5 years, but I have lived in 2 other states, one of them being New York, which is a highly taxed state with a lottery, which a lot of the proceeds from selling lottery tickets goes to schools in New York. So when I hear people talk about taxes here, though, I'm not exactly sure. Yes, there's a high sales tax. I pay property taxes. But without a state income tax, yeah, well, I pay a lot of money for owning a vehicle as well. Where is the money coming from? What state funding is there? Because I as a whole, I don't feel like living here is overly expensive.
Yep, might as well.
You asked another very complex question, yes. State funding comes through the state, but our money goes to the state and then comes back in a very complex formula that I couldn't even begin to describe for you. But the money comes from sales tax revenue, it comes from a portion of property taxes, and it comes from gaming revenue, taxes on gaming, and also taxes on sleeping rooms in hotels. Right? But you asked about a lottery. Every legislative session that I can remember, some legislator puts a bill in to have a lottery in Nevada. And you know who beats it down? The casinos. They don't want the competition. Now, I don't know if we have a large enough population base to make it a viable activity anyway. However, it gets beaten down every single time.
Ralph, what's the status of mining, taxes on the mining industry?
Okay. The question was, what is the status of taxes on the mining industry? And we're not aware that they are taxed, obviously, but we don't know what percentage of that goes to the schools.
I can tell you regarding the question of mining taxes, there is one of the 17 school districts in the state of Nevada, Eureka. They get no money from the state of Nevada. The mines pay Eureka directly. And I believe it's the highest per pupil allocation in the state.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we've got a couple of, let me get a couple in the back and I'll get to you, Lou. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm preparing to graduate for secondary ed in history. What would you say is, because it's a 2-part question, how can teachers, first years, second years, I have a lot of friends that are in the same situation, how can we combat all of these funding issues? You know, we're already fighting in the classroom to educate the students, so what can we do in the large spectrum of things, like what's the chain? And then the other thing is, I feel that by dividing into different districts, we're always growing. So won't we again in a few years face the same issue of overpopulated districts? And so, I mean, is it like just a temporary solution to a long-term problem?
The first one was, as a first or second year teacher, is there something that she could do, or first or second year teachers can do, to address some of the funding issues and that you would have, that you would suggest? I think the reality is that there's lots of things you can do. You can vote, you can be out there and get involved, but the reality is you're talking about something that is extraordinarily complex. And I think it would be a mistake to say to a first-year teacher, here, go do this. Because, you're talking about people that have been doing this for years and are still working with these huge complexities. Doesn't mean don't try. But there's no one thing. Outside of, I would say, you should vote. You should be involved in the political process.
Going back to the councils, the citizens groups that pressured initially for the countywide districts, going back to history a little bit there, creating citizens groups like that.
I suppose, yeah. But you are talking about, if you're a first-year teacher, and I'm not a teacher, let me make that very clear. I have run museums for 40 years. There is no way under the sun you will see me in a classroom except as a guest lecturer. My wife is a professor at UNLV. I'm familiar with what goes into that. That's not my world. But what I would say is that any first or second year student, their teacher, you've got a lot to do already. You've got to do that.
How did you guys become assistant superintendents? Like, what is the process
there we go.
for that?
How did you move from teaching into administration?
To become an administrator in the Clark County School District, you have to have a master's degree, and then you wait until the district opens up its process and you make an application, and you have to take a writing test, and we found out this last week that at one group of 450 educators who were taking that test and the writing sample, half of them failed the writing sample. Now, what does that say? I don't know. I was appalled.
But hasn't it changed since because the masters now they have certification units or something like that?
Yes, that's
Okay,
involved in
so
certification.
do you still need those certification units and masters?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay, and there's, yes.
I was just wondering if you could give a little bit more information about Kelly versus CCSD. And
Any more information on Kelly versus CCSD, the court case? Anybody?
We were finally declared a unified school district. I can't tell you the year. I've frankly forgotten what year it was, but it was in the 1990s somewhere. The court finally said, okay, you're integrated now, so we'll drop the case, or close it, actually. We have some documents in our archive office that outline the whole lawsuit and the case itself when it went to court, et cetera, et cetera. If you're interested in doing something with that, for example, with a master's thesis or a research paper, we'll be glad to help you.
And where is the office located?
The office is at Orr Middle School, over behind the Boulevard Mall.
So if anybody's looking for a master's project, I have a feeling there's maybe a few others that would be available. Something you might want to note there. Any other question? Oh, I'm sorry, Lou. Yes.
The question I have is the city of Henderson, of course, the second largest city. There's been talk that they'd like to have their own district. Now, having that, it doesn't sound very, very comfortable to hear that they might not be able to divorce themselves from what we have presently have. If that's the question, and I suspect that from hearing all of you, that might be a big problem.
I see it as a big problem. I think that the elephant in the room with the bond issue that we've had over a period of time has to be solved if we're going to deconsolidate I mean, yes, Henderson wants their own district, so does Moapa Valley and Virgin Valley. They'd like to be out and doing their own thing too. So, but too many elephants running around.
We have to remember too, when schools have been built, they cost a lot of money. And I can tell you that Moapa Valley and Virgin Valley wouldn't have those beautiful new high schools were it not for you and I paying for it from the valley here, because they don't have the bonding capacity there to build a $50 million high school.
Yes, and Eric, no, you had another comment though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lou, would Henderson like to control their curriculum? In other words, what is taught? What does Henderson want? Ralph, is there any talk of having this district where each community could control their curriculum? Is there any talk about having a group? I don't know if you'd call them board members or, like Henderson could have a group that would, leave everything else, but they could control or maybe hire their teachers and their curriculum.
I don't think there's been in-depth conversations. But that's just one of a whole slew of issues. If Henderson ran its own school district, North Las Vegas would have its school district, Las Vegas would have its. But what about Clark County? Clark County is all the rest of the stuff around there. Indian Springs would have a district. Sandy Valley probably would have one. Moapa Valley, Virgin Valley, Boulder City. But you got lots of pockets around there that aren't part of the incorporated cities too. So where does that fit in? The bonding thing is huge. The services, we talked about busing. How about food service? Right now, there's a massive building way out on, is it the 15, where I don't know how many tens of thousands of breakfasts and lunches are made every day and distributed to schools. Are we going to have a whole bunch of those throughout the valley in the future? It's this whole bunch of logistical issues.
And you're dealing with the 5th largest school district in the United States. This is a huge issue. And I don't think that we're going to have an answer, and can't expect from our panel an answer of how to break it up. But we know that the discussions are continuing, the efforts are continuing. I think that it's clear that the understanding of all of the variant parts that go into an issue of breaking up any kind of business. It's not like breaking up Ma Bell. If you remember Ma Bell, I do, where you were able to break it up sort of geographically. It doesn't work quite as well when you're dealing with schools and taxes and issues like that. It's going to be a huge issue, and I don't think it's fair to ask our panel tonight to fix that in the time that we have here. I'll take one more question. Yes, ma'am.
I make myself look stupid by talking, but anyway, two things. First of all, I remember, and Kay, remember, all of you do, when we divided into more areas. That was supposed to make everything closer, more personal, more control of the, and so on. But one of the things it also did was it created more and more administrative costs. And every district that you create becomes another administrative cost. And I'm sorry, I was an administrator, and we're the most expensive part of the personnel in the district. Whether we like to admit it or not, because we're all 12-month employees instead of, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Every time you add an administrator, you add another support staff, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or whatever.
Can you talk to the county about the county museum? So I haven't gotten that support staff.
Okay, anyway,
just as an aside.
That's one of the things that drives me crazy, because I remember the cost cost of doing that was astronomical. And to me, it seems like this is going to take more money away from students, in my feeling. But the other thing I have is, as a grandmother now, some personal experience with a district similar to what you're talking about in the Phoenix area, because they're in Sacramento, and everything's broken up into small school districts. And one of the things that I noticed about that happened with my grandchildren is that they were in an older part of town. They had some interesting difference in terms of what was available money-wise for each district. So our grandchildren never had a music teacher. Whereas if you were out in the Elk Grove, you had music teachers. When we are in Las Vegas right now, you cannot be in Las Vegas schools and not have a music teacher. So we have protected some things for children that I'm not sure parents realize that we've protected by saying that every school shall have certain things. That's just what it, and I'm sorry, I just have to play devil's advocate. I worry about those kinds of things.
Yep, absolutely. One slight aside, I will tell you a quick story. When you're talking about debt and bond debt, I don't think that we can do what Lincoln County did to Clark County when Clark County separated in 1909. In 1909, Lincoln County required that Clark County take on 60% of the debt of the Lincoln County Courthouse, which had been refinanced twice and the debt was already larger than what it had cost to build the courthouse. Clark County actually paid off their 60%. Lincoln County did not pay off their 40%. They continued to renegotiate that, and 2 years after the Lincoln County Courthouse was condemned, it was paid off at just under $1 million in the 1920s. So when we're dealing with debt, debt has been an issue with many separations in our state's history. I want to thank our panel tonight. You guys are great. I learned a lot.